Ever get that feeling? You know that feeling where you're just like drowning in information, but you're not actually learning anything.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you're just consuming.
Totally. You're full but not actually nourished.
Exactly. And that's why I'm so fascinated by Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, he takes these complex social phenomena, these things that like make up our world, and he somehow manages to spin them into these narratives.
Right. He's a great storyteller.
And they're so compelling that you almost forget that you're actually learning something.
Yeah.
Which I think is like the holy grail, right?
Totally. It's like sneaking in vegetables when no one's looking.
Exactly. You're getting your brain food without even realizing it.
I've been really curious about his latest book, Revenge of the Tipping Point. It seems like he's almost like revisiting his own legacy in a way.
That's what's so interesting about it. He's going back to the very concept that made him a household name, tipping points. You know, those moments where a small thing can spark a huge change.
Right, like that butterfly effect idea, but on a societal scale.
Exactly. But this time, he's grappling with the flip side. The kind of tipping points that aren't so positive.
Ooh, that's interesting.
So we're doing a deep dive today. Articles, reviews. We even dug into his Wikipedia page, you know, just to get the full picture.
Sounds thorough.
And let me tell you, the guy's background is just as interesting as his books. Did you know he was a nationally ranked runner in high school?
No way. I had no idea.
Yeah. Makes you wonder if he sees, like, life itself as a series of tipping points, you know, pushing past one threshold after another.
I love that. And you know what else is interesting? His upbringing. I mean, a Mennonite community in Canada.
Right. Talk about a contrast.
It seems like such a far cry from the thought-provoking stuff he writes about now.
You know, it does. But then again, his mom was a Jamaican psychotherapist, and his dad was a British math professor.
Wow. Talk about an interesting mix.
Seriously, you can almost see how those influences like blended together to create this fascination with human behavior, with patterns.
It's like the perfect recipe for a mind that's drawn to those bigger questions.
And what's really got me hooked is that he's not just revisiting tipping points, he's wrestling with how the world has changed since his first book came out.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So much has shifted, especially with the internet and social media.
Exactly. I mean, back in 2000 when The Tipping Point was published, the internet was still kind of figuring itself out.
Right. Social media wasn't even a thing yet. Not really.
But fast forward to today, and ideas can explode globally overnight. It's almost like he's asking, what happens when the very forces I wrote about become supercharged?
Oh, wow. And the implications of that are huge.
Exactly. And some of the reviews we looked at suggest that he's grappling with the idea that this rapid spread of ideas, while it can be powerful, it can also be really destructive.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
For sure. In the Slate review, for example, they highlight how he explores the opioid epidemic in the book, which is, you know, a pretty stark reminder that tipping points aren't always a good thing.
That's a really good point. It's like progress isn't always linear, right?
Exactly. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's even dangerous.
And it's not just the opioid epidemic he looks at. The Wall Street Journal review mentions something about bank robberies in L.A.
Yeah, so this was a really interesting example. Apparently in the 1990s, Los Angeles saw this huge spike in bank robberies. And get this, Gladwell links it to the number of banks and their proximity to freeways.
Wait, what? How does that even...
Right. It sounds crazy at first.
Yeah.
But his argument is that the environment itself, like the physical layout of the city, created this perfect storm for that particular crime.
Oh, wow. So it's like the environment tipped the scales towards criminal behavior.
Exactly. It's all about those unexpected connections. You know, the small details that we don't even think about can have these huge ripple effects. But it's not all doom and gloom. He also introduces these new concepts in the book: overstories, super spreaders, and social engineering.
Okay, those sound intense. Break those down for me.
So overstories are like these unspoken narratives that shape a culture. They're the unwritten rules, the beliefs that we kind of just absorb without even realizing it.
Oh, I get it. So like the unspoken rules of a workplace, or even just like social etiquette.
Exactly. And Gladwell argues that these overstories are the foundation for how ideas spread, for better or worse.
And what about super spreaders? That sounds kind of ominous.
Right. Well, he's talking about those individuals who are really good at transmitting ideas, whether those ideas are positive or negative. Think about the influencers you follow online, or that friend who always seems to know about the next big thing before anyone else.
Oh, interesting. So they're like shaping our worldview even if we don't realize it.
Precisely. And then there's social engineering. which is basically how we're learning to manipulate the spread of ideas, consciously or unconsciously.
It's like he's giving us the tools to understand how we're being influenced and how we influence others.
Exactly. It's about being more aware of those forces that shape our opinions and behaviors. But, even with all these thought-provoking ideas, Gladwell's work always seems to get this really mixed reception.
Oh, yeah. People tend to either love him or hate him.
Right. Like the Wall Street Journal review was pretty positive, but then you have the New York Times calling him a maestro of appropriation through better branding.
Ouch. That's a bit harsh, don't you think? I mean, I get it. Sometimes he simplifies complex topics.
That's the main critique, isn't it?
Yeah.
That he prioritizes a good story over, hardcore academic research. The Washington Post called his work simple, vacuous truths dressed up with flowery language.
Well, they're not holding back. But here's the thing. I think there's value in making these ideas accessible, Not everyone wants to wade through pages of academic jargon.
Totally. He's like the gateway drug to deeper thinking.
Exactly. He gets people interested, and then they can choose to dive deeper if they want to. It's like he sparks the curiosity, and we get to decide if we want to fan those flames.
Yeah, I like that. And, speaking of sparking curiosity, one of the examples Gladwell uses in the book is about the Holocaust.
Oh, wow. Okay, that seems like a very different kind of tipping point than, say, bank robberies or even the opioid epidemic.
Right. I mean, how do you even begin to connect those dots?
I'm really curious about how he approaches such a sensitive and significant event. What does the review say?
So, according to the Wall Street Journal, Gladwell argues that public awareness of the Holocaust, like really widespread awareness, didn't actually hit a tipping point until the 1970s.
Really? But the Holocaust happened decades earlier. What does he say changed in the 70s?
He points to that miniseries Holocaust that aired on NBC in 1978. The one with Meryl Streep.
Oh, yeah, I think I've heard of it. It was huge, right?
Exactly. And Gladwell's argument is that this fictionalized portrayal, while obviously not a replacement for actual historical accounts, it somehow made the horrors of the Holocaust more real, more emotionally accessible to a wider audience.
That's a really interesting point. Sometimes it takes a story, even a fictional one, to really make us feel something, to make history hit home.
Right. And it's heartbreaking in a way, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That it took a TV show for this horrific event to really capture the public's attention on a massive scale.
It really speaks to the power of storytelling, doesn't it? How a well-crafted narrative can cut through the noise and really stay with us.
Totally. And that's where his idea of social engineering comes into play again. Because it's not enough to just have a powerful story. You have to know how to tell it, how to package it in a way that's going to resonate with people.
It's like marketing, but for ideas.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Gladwell would argue that we're all participating in this kind of social engineering, whether we realize it or not. We're constantly curating our online personas, sharing articles we agree with, trying to sway people to our way of thinking.
It's true. We're all mini Gladwells in a way.
And that's kind of a scary thought when you really think about it.
It is. And it's a lot of responsibility, too. I mean, if we're all capable of shaping narratives, of becoming these super spreaders, then we have to be really mindful of the ideas we're putting out there.
That's such an important point. And it kind of makes you wonder if Gladwell himself has become like the ultimate social engineer in a way.
Oh, totally. I mean, he's mastered the art of taking complex ideas and making them palatable, even entertaining.
Right. But then his critics would probably say that he's sacrificing nuance for the sake of a good story.
True, he does have a knack for simplification. And that's where I think, as consumers of information, we have to be careful.
We have to do our own due diligence.
Exactly. Read critically, question everything. Don't just take his word for it, or anyone's word for it, for that matter.
I love that. It's like that saying, take what resonates, leave the rest. Gladwell gives us a lot to chew on, but it's up to us to decide what we swallow and what we spit out.
Perfectly said. We're not passive sponges just soaking up whatever information comes our way. We have a choice in what we believe, in what we share, in what narratives we help to spread.
So for everyone listening, what's really resonating with you about Gladwell's approach?
Yeah, what's standing out?
Are you thinking, I got to read this book right now? Or are you more like, not so sure about that, Gladwell?
Because I gotta say, I think that's kind of the beauty of a good deep dive,
Totally agree.
It's not about us giving you all the answers tied up in a neat little bow.
Right.
It's more like, we want to get those wheels turning in your head.
Spark some debate.
Exactly. Make you think, wait a minute, what about this?
And speaking of things to ponder, I'm really curious to hear your take on this whole overstories thing,
Oh, yeah.
because we kind of touched on it earlier, but I feel like that's a rabbit hole we could explore forever.
Totally. So much to unpack there.
So what about you? Any overstories that have shaped your own life? Like those unspoken rules or beliefs you didn't even realize were there until you bumped right into them?
Oh, for sure. And I think that's something Gladwell's really good at, you know?
Oh, cool.
He kind of nudges us to look for those patterns, those hidden narratives in our own lives. And for me, one that keeps coming up is this whole idea of education and success. Like growing up, it was just this given that going to a good college was the ticket to a good life, you know?
Oh, yeah.
No one really questioned it. It was just the way things were. But it wasn't until much later that I realized how much that overstory, that unspoken belief, had shaped so many of my choices, what I prioritized, how I defined success even.
Wow, that's so true. Like, it's amazing how those overstories, they kind of get passed down, right?
Totally.
Almost like heirlooms, but instead of furniture, it's these beliefs and expectations.
It's like we inherit them without even realizing it. And sometimes I think we got to ask ourselves, are these overstories still serving me? Or is it time to write a new narrative?
That's so powerful. And it's exactly why these conversations about Gladwell, they matter so much,
Absolutely.
Because whether you agree with every single thing he says or not, he's making us confront the power of these narratives.
Right. The ones we buy into, the ones we don't even realize are there. They all have this huge influence on how we see the world.
Totally. And maybe even more importantly, how we think about our place in it.
It's like he's saying, wake up, pay attention. These forces are shaping your life, whether you're aware of them or not.
It's like he's handing us a flashlight and being like, go on, explore the dark corners of your own mind. You might be surprised by what you find lurking in there.
Haha, exactly. And you know what else? It's not just about being more aware of these overstories.
What else?
It's about realizing that we're not just like these passive characters in someone else's narrative.
I like where you're going with this.
We have the power to shape those narratives too, to become super spreaders of the ideas that we believe in, you know?
It's like we're all authors of our own stories, and we get to choose what kind of impact we want to have.
100%. So what are you going to spread? What kind of story do you want to tell?
Now, those are the million-dollar questions. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Malcolm Gladwell and his Revenge of the Tipping Point, we're going to leave you with those to ponder.
Yep, that's your homework.
Because ultimately, it's about more than just reading a book or listening to a podcast, right?
Oh, for sure. It's about applying these ideas to your own life, to your own way of thinking.
So we hope this conversation has sparked some new insights, maybe even ignited a little debate.
A healthy dose of disagreement never hurt anyone.
And hey, maybe you even stumbled upon a few of your own overstories that you want to examine a little more closely.
Because that's where the real magic happens.
Until next time, everyone,
Yeah.
Keep those brains buzzing and those ideas flowing.
And remember, those tipping points, they're everywhere. You never know when you might spark one yourself.